Hello, good afternoon from Edinburgh, Scotland, and welcome to the second aquaNOW audience. We have a very interesting panel here to discuss and interact about pressing issues related to world's water. We are pleased to be hosted at the Edinburgh Centre for Carbon Innovation at High School Yards, near to my alma mater, Edinburgh University, which hosts some very innovative work about carbon innovation and water-related issues. The aquaNOW audiences are all about water. We are attempting to bring together disparate water constituencies to discuss areas of common concern from different perspectives. We have technologists, we have engineers, we have scientists, we have policymakers on our panel today. I would like to introduce them firstly by asking them to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Jim Panton from Panton MacLeod.
Thank you, David. Yes, I'm here representing the SME sector. We are a small company based in the Borders, but we trade throughout the UK and to a limited extent in the US at the moment, working in drinking water quality, employing around 40 staff altogether. We are the smaller end of the spectrum, I think, on today's panel, with a very niche and bespoke service that we offer, and but keeping that very much within the global constraints and the wider subject matters that today's panel is about.
Thank you. Nicholas Simpson, can you say a few words about yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm Nick Simpson. I work for Dagramont Industry in the UK. We basically supply services and materials and equipment to industrial customers to process water, make water fit for purpose and recycle and reuse and make it fit for discharge to the environment. I'm also chair of the BCSD UK Water Group. So we're working with universities to look at water use in the UK by industrial customers. And I do a sales and marketing role.
Galen Fulford, please introduce yourself.
My name is Galen Fulford from Biomatrix Water, and we focus on utilizing natural technologies for water treatment and waterway restoration, from wastewater treatment and recycling to stormwater management and control, to turning hard-edged concrete rivers back into living waterways again.
Alan Hendry, can I ask you to speak a little bit longer, because we're co-hosting this event
Sure.
with the United Kingdom Business Council for Sustainable Development, and you are their representative here. Can you speak a little bit about yourself, but also something about UK BCSD and water?
Yes, sure. As David says, I suppose I've got two hats on today. I chair the UK branch, or the Scottish branch of the UK Business Council for Sustainable Development. This is a private sector organisation which is largely about networking, supporting business in smart, sustainable ways. We provide opportunities for people to meet. We champion good practice, and we liaise with a whole range of sectors across the UK and internationally. And we're part of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, which represents the private sector at major global talks on the environment and sustainability. My other hat, I'm also Director of Sustainability at Jacobs, a large multinational company providing professional services to a range of water companies, also to process industry, so we've got interests in all aspects of water use globally.
Thank you, Alan. And to my right, Nazli Kosioglu, please introduce yourself.
So which phone? This one.
I think that one will be fine.
My name is Nazli Kosioglu. I am a PhD student at the University of Edinburgh and Scotland's Agricultural College. My project is a part of a hydronation agenda, which is a specialised programme of Scottish Government to promote to promote Scotland's expertise in water and related topics. In my project, I look to identify the value of water for each sector and try to optimize the use of water through allocation of water among its users.
Thank you. The context of your hydronation scholarship is interesting. We're hosting this event in Scotland, which has identified itself through legislation as the Hydro Nation. And you're a number of, I think there are 6 current Hydro Nation scholars who are studying at Scottish Centres of Excellence to identify problems and solutions related to water. Introducing myself, I'm the CEO of OOSKAnews, which founded the aquaNOW audiences. We're a publishing company that reports on water from mostly developing countries. We have about 170 writers in about 60 countries. And part of our program today will be to go through some recent stories where water has hit the news, and I ask for different perspectives from each of your expertises on these. We have an audience in the room. We also have, I believe, about 500 people watching remotely through our live web stream, and those should be informed that questions can be posed to our panelists through emailing info@ooskanews.com. Now, if you're watching, you're already on ooskanews.com, so all you need to do is email info@ooskanews.com. Before we go on to looking at various water stories that are currently in the news, we've got a big question to ask the panelists, and that is, what keeps you awake at night about water-related issues? And perhaps I could ask Nick Simpson to go first.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because in the UK we do operations and maintenance for industrial customers. And one of the things we've found, certainly over the last 3 to 5 years, is that a lot of the infrastructure that's out there, although it was fit for purpose at the time it was built and constructed, due to increases in rainfall, for example, it doesn't have sufficient capacity any longer. And it wasn't something that industrial customers actually anticipated. But we found that because of the changes in the climate, we get phone calls, some of them at night, some of them at weekends. So we've seen a significant increase in just the impact of weather in this country, but across Europe, on industrial operations. Some of those operations as well, water tables have been rising. They've had significant rainfall over a short period of time, and there have been electrical problems because installations weren't, again, installed anticipating that water levels would be higher than they were when effluent treatment plants were designed and built, for example. So some of that infrastructure ends up underwater, and that means that some industrial customers can't process their wastewater, can't clean their effluent, and ultimately it ends up in the environment. So we're very conscious of the fact that as the environment changes and the weather cycle changes, it does have significant impact on existing operations within the industrial sector.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nick. I'm told that we also have our other 2 panelists also joining us by video link. Joppy Kramwinkel, who is Director for Water of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Joppy is speaking from Geneva today. And also Will Sarney, who is Director and Practice Leader of the Enterprise Water Strategy and Sustainability Unit at Deloitte Consulting LLP. Will is joining us from Denver. Will, are you there? Mr. Sarney?
David, can you hear me?
Yeah, we're with you, Will. That's great. Would you mind taking a couple of minutes just to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. So, first of all, thanks for the invitation to be here. Really pleased with the panel you put together, David. I think it's a very exciting program. So, a little bit about me. Name is Will Sarney. I'm a director at Deloitte Consulting based in Denver, Colorado. I've been in the world of water for about 35 years, primarily working for consulting firms. I lead our water strategy practice at Deloitte Consulting. We focus on working with multinational corporations in helping them understand water-related risks, business value at risk, and how to mitigate those risks. Also working with NGOs, water NGOs, through excuse me, collective action platforms. We work in the public sector also, helping them understand the economic value of water, both in the U.S. and internationally. And then also moving beyond risk, we work with a variety of companies and investors in developing business opportunities to address water scarcity and water quality issues. So a pretty good balance between the risk and the opportunity side of the equation.
P, can you hear us?
Are you talking to me, Jochen? Are you talking to me, Jochen? Are you talking to me, Jochen?
Can you take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, that's fine. Jochen Carmichael, I'm the Director of Water of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. The World Business Council unites some 200 companies which would like to have sustainability in the forefront of their strategy. And I'm running the water program for them. Before joining the World Business Council, I've worked 25 years for Shell as their environmental manager, sustainability manager, but also very much involved in building the water strategy for Shell, because as you know, oil and gas, certainly the oil side of things produces more water than oil and gas. So managing water within that context was always one of my duties. In the World Business Council, we run a water program aiming to get the business contribution defined in managing water more sustainable, ranging from investing in natural infrastructure, from improving water stewardship, defining better how we can reuse water ultimately to improve the water efficiency in agriculture. So an exciting portfolio of activities, and really glad to be here.
Thank you very much, Joppy. Joppy and Will, we're going around the table asking each of our panelists and you in turn, what keeps you awake at night about water challenges? And perhaps I could ask Jim Panton next to share his thoughts about that.
Sure. As an individual who's worked in large organizations before, I've now found myself working for a very small company, as I said in the introduction, and it's difficult not to be very focused in on the immediate things, the effect that small environment that you operate in. And I guess the majority of the things that would keep me awake at night are linked to that. I have to say, though, in preparing for today's conference, that's probably going to change now that I've been reading a lot more of the articles that you're producing and starting to get a reminder of the global scale of concerns that we all probably are thinking about and will be reflecting on in today's discussion. And that's probably going to keep me awake a bit more now than perhaps a couple of days ago. But in the context of our small company, and I probably speak on behalf of any small business operating within the supply chain in the water sector globally, and that's that keeping in business is primarily the thing that keeps us going and keeps us focused. So it comes down to relatively straightforward things like cash flow and whether we're going to be paid quickly enough by often very, very large organizations that we're working for, and whether we're going to be able to pay our bills next week as a result of being paid in time for work we do. Now, the procurement systems and the supply chain is within a large sector and industry that we operate in generally is not notoriously known for fast action and dynamic changes in direction. So being able to kind of hold your own in that quite stable environment, when sometimes as a small boat in a large ocean with large boats around you, you're sometimes pedaling under the water a little bit more than ideally you'd want to. So that's probably the main thing that I'm focused on. Around that, it's making sure that our services are relevant, and a lot of the subjects that are coming out in today's discussion inform even small players like ourselves as to whether what we are developing in terms of our R&D, our new technology provisions, our services, and the evolution of those, not just in the next year, but over the next 10 years, are those relevant to the requirements and to the need? So keeping that slightly bigger picture over on top of whether we can keep going for the next quarter, and that we are managing our logistics and our financial management around that. And I guess just to round that up, I'd bring it into kind of two zones, which is really about the market placement that we have as a small business, and also the technological or service provision, and whether those are relevant, and how we can perhaps push on further into those and grow our business and the outcome of our services. So, for example, when you look at international development as a small business, we operate in the UK with framework agreements for 5 or 6 of the main water companies. But we also have a small footprint now in the US, and we're looking at opportunities all over the rest of the world where we think our services and technologies are relevant. But as a small entity, that's pretty risky when you start putting your feelers out that far. You can easily get caught out with something that, in terms of a capital investment requirement, is just a little bit outside your reach, and can burn you quite badly. So being adventurous and being bold, but balancing that against the risk of perhaps making a small mistake that could have a large impact on our business are all things that we've really got to take into account all the time. So that's the context that we come at it from, and those are the things that are pretty much keeping me busy 9 to 5 and through the night.
Thank you, Jim. Yoppie, can you hear me?
No, I can't at the moment.
Okay. Will Sarney, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Will Sarney, can you hear me? Will, what keeps you awake at night? Will, what keeps you awake at night?
You mean related to water?
What keeps you awake at night?
That was a joke, David. So the serious answer, I think the still appalling statistics regarding access to safe water, sanitation and hygiene, the numbers are, just amazingly high. So very much the human face of water scarcity and water quality is very disturbing for me. And, some of the most satisfying work that I'm involved with is working with folks like Yopa on the WVCSD WASH Pledge, working with other NGOs that are focused on this issue, and working with multinationals that are now bringing WASH into their water stewardship programs. So, I'd say very much the human dimension of water scarcity and water quality. And then one other thing I would add is that I do have some concerns about how slowly we're moving from a water management to water stewardship mindset. I think and collective action programs are critical in addressing water scarcity and water quality.
Can I ask you, Nazli Kosioglu, what keeps you awake at night related to water?
In my case, as I'm not a practitioner, I will give a rather broad comment. What calls for my attention as a future concern related to water is the imbalance between supply and demand. If we proceed as business as usual, we will it is expected to have 40% imbalance between supply and demand by 2030. And moreover, weather extremities and such disaster related to the climate change will require more, will be more frequent and will require more attention. And I'm not even talking about quality concerns or access to water in developing world. I guess my biggest concern in general is imbalance between demand and supply.
Thank you. Alan, can you tell us what keeps you awake at night?
Thank you very much. I think probably what most folks have said I would agree with. I think the one area where I'm particularly concerned is maybe the way the developed world considers water. I think in terms of behaviour change issues, we do waste an awful lot in the Western world and maybe don't take the resource, don't give it the respect it's due. And I think we see it in our everyday lives, how much water we just waste, and the fact we're using very good quality water to wash the car, whatever, seems to me a bit strange. And I think once, as Nasli says, as the rest of the world starts to want to use water the way we are, then the issues are going to be really severe. So I think there's a big behaviour change challenge to get people to understand water, and it's also its impact on climate change, given the energy it takes to actually clean up the water we use for often very, mundane purposes. So I think getting that understanding is, for me, one of the biggest concerns, and a bit of respect for the resource we have. And I think in Scotland, given the amount of water we have, sadly, on a day-to-day basis, we probably take that less into consideration than we should, whereas some countries it is a much more revered resource.
Thank you, Alan. Galen, can you give us your thoughts, please, about what keeps you awake at night?
Certainly, David. I think, to be honest with you, my 2-year-old son keeps me awake at night most of the time. But there's probably 2 reasons for that. One is that he's squawking about something or other, but the other is just his future and what kind of world he's going to have to encounter. And I think in terms of practical considerations with water, within the kind of supply chain of water technology companies supplying engineering and so forth, there's a huge amount of things which we can do, particularly on the domestic water side of things. But to answer your question straightforwardly, what keeps me up awake really is aquifer levels dropping, and that big meta-scale water resource being depleted. So when you see pictures and charts of groundwater in key food-producing areas dropping year on year, that is an extremely frightening thing, which certainly keeps me awake at night when I'm not awake for other reasons. And additionally, coupled with that is the mountainous water, in the Himalayas and so forth, that feed the streams. And really, these are water sources for agriculture. And as we know, most of the water we use really is used for agricultural purposes, food producing. So when with these, groundwater dropping and then water from glaciers in the mountains becoming less, we're faced with acute water shortage, which, the engineering skills that we have here at this table, which are considerable, we can't really solve those big problems very easily, which worries me. The problems which we can solve through changing electrical placements and, working out groundwater stuff and better water recycling can do a lot in terms of our domestic water scarcity, domestic water shortage. But what do we do when we don't have enough water to grow the food which we need to grow? Lots of progress been made in terms of efficient irrigation, and I don't know, to be honest, how much farther we can push efficient irrigation. So that's the third kind of leg of this stool, which concerns me. Do we really have more we can get from irrigation? Groundwater levels dropping in key producing areas, and loss of water resources in high mountain water reserves. Thank you.
Thank you, Galen. Do we have Yoppie?
Yeah, me? Yeah, me?
Yes, Yoppie, we can hear you.
Yes, Yoppie, we can hear you.
Can you give us a couple of moments your thoughts about what keeps you awake at night about water challenges?
there's still billions of people not having adequate water and sanitation, and I think it's a bloody shame, and we have to do something about it. And we are, in our modest organization, doing something about it. So really calling on many others to put their skills, money, and effort into dealing with the bottom of the pyramid challenges in terms of access to water and sanitation. On the more broader water scale, I believe the solutions are there. I mean, the previous speaker said that he thinks that there is a limit already reached with respect to irrigation. I don't think that at all. I think there are many innovative approaches out there, but the real problem is actually getting those solutions to market. And it's probably best captured by Paul Polman recently said, the cost of inaction is greater than the cost of action. So it is what keeps me awake is how can we drive people actually to do the right things today and avoiding to wait until the well is dry, or as one of the other speakers said, whether there are floods or droughts, which really makes us to act. So that's in short my contribution.
Thank you very much, Joppe. One takeaway that I have from the panelists' contributions is that Jim Panton and Galen speak from a relatively small company perspective, and we have representatives from larger organizations that look at the opportunity side of water challenges. It must be a very different experience. What do you think, Alan Hendry?
Well, I think a lot of companies are now realising that the cost of water and are being much more efficient in its use. I mean, I think compared to carbon, it's still a bit of a Cinderella subject, but I think that's changing very rapidly, and I'm sure Will's aware of many companies who are now putting in place strategies to make their use of water more efficient. But I think there's also opportunities for the likes of the larger companies to take on board some of the smaller niche companies and bring their technologies to market, and that can be a route where we can all get improvements and offer new solutions to some of our existing clients.
But that's not an easy road to walk, is it, Galen?
What can I say?
Or Jim?
Yeah, I think the underlying parameter is, and it's probably going to come up in the next section where we talk about the first news article that you shared with us, and that's the fact that finance drives so much of what we're talking about. If you look at the kind of key elements of sustainability, whether that's political or social or climate and environmentally orientated, there's a really strong part coming through on the financial side that dominates that whole bit. And whether that's a small company like us, and I felt, and my answer about what keeps me awake at night, that was absolutely the honest answer. Not to say I don't have concerns on a larger scale as was shared by others, but financially underneath all of that, there is one similarity. If there is a difference in terms of what happens on a day-to-day basis in the structure of the business, or the risk strength capability of the business, and that's unfortunately the dollar, the pound drives so much of what we're still talking about. So if it's significantly helpful on a financial point of view for a priority to be placed on zero loss of water in an industrial setup, then that's going to take a much higher priority than might be the case. One of the things that's in my background, as per the bio that was shared, I think perhaps online, was I have a charitable background with working for charitable companies, and we would often talk to businesses about their corporate social responsibility agenda or their corporate social responsibility strategy, of which actually a lot of this falls in under. But often we'd find that it would be something that was good PR to be talking about that, but actually the reality of what was being delivered sometimes wasn't quite as strong as the sentiment would be portrayed in what they would say about it. And the Cinderella subject, I think, is very, very valid. This is becoming a trendier subject to talk about in strategic terms, but actually in practical implementation, it's probably still got a long, long way to go. And the thing that's going to make the biggest difference is where the financial returns are going to be for the business, whether it's my small company or a large corporate conglomerate. The 5p charge on a Tesco's bag, if I'm allowed to mention one particular supermarket, there are others, of course, where you can get your shopping from. That is a financially driven drive into a kind of regulatory approach to try and influence change in this. And it's a real shame, because I think from a social point of view and a social conscience, this stuff should be happening automatically. You listen to the things that have been said, and it makes sense that we should all be getting all over this as much as we possibly can for the greater good of the planet. But unfortunately, the financial element is really going to drive the majority of the action.
Do you think water's too cheap then?
You're gonna tempt me into using a quote I've got saved up for later. But yes, I think so. The short answer is absolutely.
Yeah. So CSR is one thing, and then financial imperatives are another in the corporate sphere, which kind of takes us on to the first of the stories that were circulated through OOSKAnews and to our panelists in the last few days. If you're watching online, go to the bottom of the screen and it'll be the first link. And the headline is "More than 2/3 of reporting Global 500 companies face substantive water risks," according to a report that was released by CDP, it used to be called the Carbon Disclosure Project, last week, that there is increasing awareness of corporate and financial risk associated with water scarcity and other water challenges. Joppe, would you mind going first and giving us your thoughts about the findings of this report?
Obviously, the CDP has done a great job in getting data out of companies to assess their risks, and it is really good to see that most companies have identified water as one of their key risks. The issue is, and Will is on the call and has done a lot of work on that, is the question is, all right, being aware that you have risks, is that good enough? The question is, how do you have addressed that risk? And to what extent are you actually, and Will has said it, operating not only within the fence of your operation, but you're also actually dealing with the risks in the watershed itself. So we call that shared risks, shared opportunities. So to a certain extent, I'm glad that this has emerged, and I understand that many companies have used the World Business Council's Global Water Tool to assess the risk, to know where their risks are. But the real question, of course, is how do they address these risks, and to what extent are they taking their stakeholders with whom they live in the rivershed, in the rivershed, the watershed, take them with them in their solutions.
How much of that is CSR, and how much of it is genuine sort of existential risk based?
Sorry, is the question to me then? Water is a reality. I mean, if they understand there's a water risk, that's visible, that's clear. So I mean, it is definitely not CSR. It is a proper understanding that there is a risk. So I don't see this as a risk. I see the solution often very self-centered. In other words, I address the risk within the framework of my own operations. And there is an outcome out of the work of CDP Water, which actually illustrates that. And I don't necessarily think that the solution is just within the fence, because that's the nature of water. So answering your question, this is definitely not CSR. This is hurting the companies. So I mean, this is real. This is what they're dealing with. The only question mark I put is in the solutions they apply to deal with these risks.
Nasli, I'd like to hear your views about this story and the CDP report.
I think the CDP report have underlined the fact that water efficiency or water stewardship is not a corporate social responsibility issue only, but also an indicator that the investor looks in companies for their investment decisions, because it is a vital input for the continuity of any company's operations. For this reason, I think the first news story, shows us the trend in the investment community for realizing the importance of water. Actually, the Carbon Disclosure Project have previously published a report for internal pricing of carbon for companies, and maybe same kind of report for water would also be a good idea to realize the water stress in specific locations of operation.
Well, Nick Simpson, is water trading a reality in our lifetimes?
It's an interesting article. My concern about the article is that it looks very much from a financial perspective. So what is the impact on your business of water scarcity, and what will that cost your business? How does that impact shareholders? How does that impact pension funds? Rather than actually what is your impact on water scarcity? So for me, it's kind of flipped the other way around, where these companies need to consider where they develop their operations. Is water scarce in the first place? Are their operations likely to impact water scarcity in those regions? And if so, why go there? Are there better ways to do things? So for me, the report is important, and it shows some engagement in terms of the importance that water sits. But it doesn't kind of get to the nub of it for me, because it's around your impact as a company on your environment. And if war ultimately breaks out over water as opposed to over oil, because water is essential for life after all, you could see things in these hotspots of the world where things occur because of water, and it becomes far more political. So I see it very much as you've got to be cognizant of the future and your impact within your environment, but also on the populace as a whole. In terms of water trading, you might find certain geographies. The Water Nation is a good example as a start, where you have an abundance of water, you have infrastructure to support industrial growth or improved food production. So there may be areas of the world that are more suited to produce and manufacture than other parts of the world, and maybe that is part of an economic map and a redrawing as to where that occurs.
So Scotland, the Hydro Nation, can become a magnet for water-intensive industry?
Definitely.
What do you think, Alan Hendry?
No, I'd agree. I mean, it's all about where the resource is. The other thing I thought was interesting about the CDP report was that the companies listed there are certainly the companies you would expect to be doing the right things. You know, they're already doing the right things in terms of carbon management, so they have that heritage and understanding of resource use. I guess there's probably some issues about how that is then, how they use that to drive their supply chains response. But I guess there's the companies who are not listed here that are ones that are more concerned. So there's no great surprises, I would say, in terms of the businesses that have been mentioned, and certainly they're doing some good work already. But if they're providing the leadership, then that's at least encouraging to see.
Will Sarney, a moment of insider baseball. Aren't there too many of these reports? There is, with respect, WBCSD has its water risk tool. There's the aqueduct product that's turned out by the World Resources Institute. WWF has its water risk filter. Aren't we, I mean, okay, water's a very sexy subject these days, but aren't we getting a little bit of overkill?
So let me try and tackle that. What is happening is that there is a recognition that we need a variety of different water risk tools. And you see folks like WPCSD and WRI and WWF and others developing tools that companies can use, and they all have different functionalities. I think at some point there'll be some convergence between these tools, but we're at the stage where these tools are absolutely essential to provide companies and the public sector with an understanding of water-related risk across three dimensions and as it relates to scarcity and quality. Then the other side of this is reporting frameworks like CDP. My view is that CDP has done an excellent job in raising the issue of water as a business issue, and it complements the work that YOPA does with WBCSD and some of the other NGOs out there. So while in some ways I think companies are experiencing a bit of reporting fatigue, CDP coupled with the water risk tools that you're seeing out in the marketplace serve a very, very important purpose at this stage of the game.
Will, back to you again. Is it fair to observe that the large corporations are ahead of the game in terms of appreciating water risk, where the general public, the domestic consumer of water, is yet to appreciate the value of the substance?
You touched on a couple of things which I'll tackle. I think businesses, multinational corporations, in particular in a few key sectors, recognize that water-related risks are really a business risk. And they are working, I believe, diligently to understand what that water risk looks like, translate that to business value at risk. So we move well beyond the price of water and start thinking about the brand value associated with water stewardship. I think the public sector, is beginning to understand the importance, the value of water when you don't have it. So I'm based in Denver, and if you look at what's going on in the Western U.S. right now, you see that we are experiencing very profound water scarcity, and that is translating into changes in public policy around pricing and allocation schemes, increased education and awareness. So, businesses are typically pretty quick to respond to risk-related issues at the enterprise level, and I think what you're seeing certainly in the CDP report this year and through some of the initiatives that YOPA leads is that businesses understand that water is a business risk, and they need to manage that risk just like any other enterprise risk through embedding it into supply chain programs, M&A transactions, operations, and so on.
Jim Panton.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I almost would like to turn into a secondary question on the same subject, if I may, based on a couple of points that have been raised. Will, you were just talking about water-related risk and the value of water linked to scarcity. And Nick was talking about that kind of financial drivers and motivators that are at play in the whole thing. I think there's an interesting point within just the heading of the paper that was produced by CDP, which talks about from water risks to value creation. And it's that phrase value creation that caught my mind, because often from a financial point of view, we're talking about water as a risk, and 68% apparently of these businesses were saying that water risk is something that could substantially change their business operation or revenue. The implication is in a negative way, because it's a risk, because something will go wrong if you don't wake up and deal with this. But I wonder the extent to which actually value creation or the value of water is something that's a business opportunity, where and I guess the question that I wouldn't mind throwing in is, do the other panelists feel that there's there's a joining up that can happen between the financial drivers of business need and requirements to operate as businesses, and the environmental requirements to meet in a positive way, so that businesses is achieving or creating value, if you interpret it in that direction, financially for their businesses, but at the same time, big steps are being made in progressing the environmental challenges that a lot of this is presenting us with.
Well, deriving opportunity from risk, is it still tenuous, Alan, or is it really happening?
I would say it is happening. I don't think it's tenuous. I mean, I think there's never sort of a right or a wrong answer to this, because there's a question of degree. Some people totally get it and will spend large amounts of money and do the right thing, get the technologies, change the behaviours and make a change. And others don't, and even within large organisations you'll get variance. So you'll get some people who are completely hooked into the issue and doing a lot of activity around it, and others who just frankly don't get it. So it's quite a hard one to answer, because I don't think there's a yes or a no answer to it. I think there's a degree of variation, but I think if you look at all the statistics and the CDP report, obviously the smarter businesses are getting it and seeing the opportunities. And to slightly, I suppose, change it and take it away from maybe sort of use of water, we're also seeing a sort of increase in the use of blue-green infrastructure. So cities are much more now about creating blue infrastructure to mitigate the climate change issues and create better environments. So there's that opportunity as well.
Joppy Kramwinkel, your members are on both sides of this equation, the risk and the opportunity. How well are they being joined together? How well are they being joined together? I can hear you in the room here.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Do you hear me? I'm sorry, I was on mute. Do you hear me? Good. Shall I continue?
Yes, please.
Of course, risk and opportunity are going hand in hand. So I mean, if you have a risk and you manage that risk proper, you can create value. So I mean, there's no separation of one to the other. It is understanding the risk in the first instance, which is key. But we strongly advocate and work with our members to use that understanding to create value. Now, that value can be in very many different ways. I mean, you can express that in relationships with your stakeholders surrounding your facilities. It can be in creating new markets. It can be by developing new products. All that can be used. So, the heart of the question is we're on both sides of the equation. I would say absolutely. I mean, that's the basis for doing business. If you understand the risk, you grab the opportunities. So, and that's what our members are trying to do. And our organization is in that sense unique, that we try to work with corporations which are in different parts of the value chain together to create more value out of understanding that risk than if you do it alone.
Thank you, Joppy. We have a question from an online viewer, Roger Mercier from North Carolina, and it's actually for Nick Simpson. Do you see the industrial sector becoming more proactive about dealing with new challenges related to infrastructure, looking at new types of infrastructure or planning for changes, or is it still largely reacting as problems arise?
With any business, and this gentleman next to me will tell you, there are conflicting priorities, and those priorities change, sometimes on a daily basis, sometimes on a Friday night, or over an extended period of time. When climate changes and you have less water than you did last year or the year before, and it starts to impact your business, it rises up the agenda. When it rains, it tends to go away. So these conflicting priorities do wane and do increase in emphasis. So really, you have to strike while the iron's hot, because you have to justify that internally. You'll have rates of return, you'll have economic models. There will be a need to keep the operation going. If you look at it strategically in the future, again, you need past experience, because you wouldn't necessarily innovate if you didn't need to. So again, it's around those drivers, those corporate drivers. We find within industry in general, there's competition for capital. There's competition between producing more or making your existing infrastructure more efficient. And typically energy projects are big value projects because the cost of energy is significant relative to the cost of water. And again, this comes back to the discussion around, is water valued as it should be? So when those economics don't stack up, it's very difficult to improve infrastructure and innovate within that. There are certain companies that will, but they tend to be the leaders, as Alan's already mentioned. But typically it's driven by issues outside of normal day-to-day business.
Can I ask, given we can increasingly know what the future weather patterns are going to be, are you seeing companies looking and projecting ahead to say, I know what the conditions we're going to face over the next 20 years, and adjusting their processes or their operations accordingly?
Yes, we are. Again, I think a lot of business has been caught on the back foot. And there's certainly been, over the last 2 to 3 years, an increased capacity to look into the future around utilities. Utilities have always been there to produce, and they've tended to be the poor relation relative to production. That is changing. Again, we talked about things being driven by environmental legislation. More companies are more forward thinking, but I honestly believe there is value in becoming a more sustainable business. Water is relatively cheap today. It will be more expensive tomorrow. So anything you do now will save you money. So anything you can do to impact efficiency, it's worth doing. And there is a move within business to consider that more frequently.
Thank you. Galen, I'd like you to chip in on that question. You're in the water infrastructure business.
Yeah, I think on the business risk, I mean, water is inherently unpredictable and fluctuating and risky. I mean, I've got little hatches cut in the floor of my house so I can look underneath and make sure that my pipes aren't leaking. And so there's always risk there. And I think to have a report which highlights the risks for big business is important, but it's something we should all be aware of all the time. And I think as you were saying, about risk to infrastructure and electricity and so forth, that is becoming more and more an issue, and that does open opportunities for business. I mean, if you were to ask me today, how's the water situation and globally, I would say, well, it's a bit tricky. And if you were to ask me, hey, how's business, I would say it's quite fine. And the two are definitely linked. For example, I'm working on a project just on the train down earlier this morning, where we're taking an opportunity to utilize a canal system to receive stormwater to mitigate, impacts on drainage and reduce combined sewage overflow events. However, there's a risk to the business, the developer in building, multi-million-dollar housing project, in doing this, that things aren't designed right. So when it came on the project, there's, a stormwater pond collecting all the water, and a set of pumps which then pump it into the canal at a regulated rate and so forth. But the elevations are not quite right, and if there's a power outage, for example, in a storm, which happens to be giving you, for example, a lot of water, then the water level rises and the entire floor of the building and parking garage was about to flood. So that's a risk which, through kind of good design and good business practice, we've mitigated, and the system is now designed to operate on gravity alone. So there's definitely opportunities there for putting the pieces together. I think one of the risks and challenges is that these kinds of situations like the one I just described are so complicated. There's so many different factors, the water surface area, the elevation, what's happening, in terms of all different factors, that it can be quite difficult for businesses or individuals, as it were, or city councils to put together all of these complicated issues, which are so dynamic, because that's how water is, to come up with a solution which is really sustainable. And I think that we're getting quite good at that within Scotland in particular, and within the industry, you know, as SUDS and all these different factors start to become more and more integrated. So I think there's an exciting time ahead for industry, definitely for SME companies who are quick on their feet to look at the problems and the risks and put the pieces together to make these sustainable solutions work.
Will Sarney, would you agree there are an awful lot of opportunities for SMEs in the sector?
I think there are opportunities for everyone. You know, going back to some of the earlier comments, I think water scarcity and water quality issues drive innovation, and companies are beginning to recognize that in a couple of different ways. You know, certainly for those companies that can operate in a water scarce or stressed environment, they then have, at least by one dimension, a competitive advantage. And then, you know, for those companies that can drive efficiency and reuse within their own four walls and across their supply chain through product innovation, you know, they're just tremendous business opportunities available. And I believe we're starting to see those in the marketplace coming out of water technology accelerators or hubs or even large multinationals that are now beginning to focus on new products and services and new business models.
Thank you. I'm conscious that we're coming up to our halftime break. In Scotland, we're going to retire for a cup of coffee. Will, maybe it's breakfast time for you. We're going to be back in half an hour. I'd remind our remote viewers that questions to the panel can be submitted at info@OOSKAnews.com, and that the links at the bottom of your screen are to the stories that we're going to be discussing after our 30-minute break, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you. Hello, good afternoon, and welcome back to the second aquaNOW audience, where we are gathered in Edinburgh, Scotland, to discuss water, business risk and opportunity. Our panel will shortly share with us their views on a number of water stories that have recently been in the news. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our hosts, the Edinburgh Centre for Carbon Innovation, and also our supporters at Scottish Enterprise, Highlands and Islands Enterprise, the Scottish Government and aquanow.info, without whose help this would have taken longer. We would like to give an opportunity to one of our supporters, the Government of Scotland, to say a few words about the Hydronation Initiative and the forthcoming World Water Congress, which will be hosted here in Edinburgh in May 2015. That's the IWRA's triennial event. If I can welcome Mr. Barry Gregg, who is the Hydronation Manager representing the Scottish Government.
Thanks, David. I've really enjoyed the discussion today. It's been very interesting, and very grateful for this opportunity to speak to your audience and guests here today. I work for the water industry team of the Scottish Government, and we have a programme which is called Scotland, the Hydronation, which is essentially our policy in relation to the water industry in Scotland, with the aim to maximise the value of our water resources, whether that is the water itself or the people that work within the industry around water, and the knowledge economy that built up around water issues as well. And very pleased to see Nasli on the panel today, who's one of a number of hydronation scholars, which is a key part of the hydronation programme. Scotland has a particular place in the world in terms of its scientific learning as a centre for progressive thinking, and water is an area in which we think we have quite a lot to offer the world. We have a unique governance regime in Scotland in particular, and think there are lessons there for others that we would like to share as we want to learn from them. And that's part of the reason why we are very pleased to be hosting the 15th IWRA World Water Congress next year, the last week in May, it's 25th to the 29th of May, and we expect well over 1,000 delegates a day to be attending the Congress from all over the world, and everybody listening today is more than welcome to register and turn up as a delegate and to enjoy Edinburgh in the springtime and get involved in some debates around the types of issues that we're talking about today. Well, I guess I just want to say you're all very welcome, and hope that we see you here next year.
Thank you very much, Barry. We're going to move to the second phase of our occasion today by discussing a series of news articles as published by OOSKAnews, the water publishing company, from around the world, and appreciate the different perspectives, whether they are from water technologists, scientists, policy and governance leaders that we're lucky enough to have on the panel today. If you look at the bottom of your screen, it's the headline, next one, which is Chinese oil company to pay $400 million for environmental damage in Chad. And each of these stories have been identified with our soft theme for today, which is business risk and opportunity. You can click on that link. It'll open up in a new tab so that you can keep on listening to us. I would be interested initially to hear Joppie Kramwinkel from WBCSD's thoughts and perspective on this story. Joppie, are you there? Joppie, are you there? Thoughts and perspective on this story. Joppie, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Very kind of you to ask me to give a response to this story, because of course, with my Shell background, I should know something about oil pollution, and I do know this. Logically, I don't expect any of the members of our organization to dump waste oil uncontrolled in any environment. So I mean, to see that if it's the case, I cannot at all justify the case itself, because don't have enough information. But if it's the case that a company is dumping oil uncontrolled, is polluting groundwater, logically, damages can be asked for. On the whole, and now it's a little bit in defense of the oil and gas industry, I see this. I don't see this as common practice. I see this as more an exception on the rule, that most companies are fully aware of the environmental controls necessary to deal with their waste. So, I mean, this is an exception. It's in country Chad, which I don't know either. I don't know the regulatory controls there. But my summary would be, yes, if you pollute, you have to pay. But I see this more as an exception than as a rule.
And also by video link, Will Sarney, your views on this story. Will Sarney, your views on this story.
David, I haven't read the story honestly, but it's a compliance issue, so I really can't say much about it.
That's fine. Nick Simpson.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in polluter pays. If you have an accident and you damage the environment, you pay to clean it up. Unfortunately, it shouldn't happen in the first place. These companies know what they're doing. Mistakes do happen, so you need to have processes in place that clean up quickly with as little environmental impact as possible. However, it shouldn't happen in the first place.
Jim Panton.
I think there's an interesting link in this story to what we were talking about before the break, where comments were made about the financial motivations in terms of where the action and activity is applied, less moral and more activity following the profit capabilities within a certain area. And again, this links back to the financial point that Nick was making earlier on about if it's going to hurt a business financially, then it'll become a priority in the boardroom, and therefore I think that it's interesting to see the financial element of this again. The regulator, which is an influential motivation for the sector, whether that's environmental, economic, or in the drinking water sector, say a water quality regulator, has a key part to play in driving where action takes place. But the lever it uses to achieve that is a financial pain line again, and it's from a small business point of view like ours. What it does is it helps us to, we found not so much it helps us, it becomes an indicator for us as to where opportunity for a small business service or technology might exist when you look at what the regulatory trends might be. Now, in this case, it's very obvious. This is a shocking end of the spectrum to all intents and purposes, and the fine perhaps should be more if any different. But perhaps on a more subtle scale, where you're looking for opportunities, the regulators' influence over what does or does not happen is absolutely key, and it's the political arm within the sustainability overall umbrella that comes into play, where if there's pressure to be put on certain areas where perhaps profit isn't taking the action, regulation can do it. And I think it's almost an obvious scenario that a heavy fine should apply, but there's quite a few subtle knock-ons that sit underneath that.
Thank you. Nazli Kosioglu.
I think this is a good news to underline the fact that ecosystem services and water is also now in the agenda of emerging developing countries. And as Nick pointed out, this kind of accidents should not happen in the first place, but if they happen, the principle of polluter pays should apply, as it is in the news story.
Alan Hendry, is this a water story or is it a pollution story?
It's both, I guess. I mean, it's very interesting, and it's obviously been bad practice on behalf of the company to let this happen. I guess for me it raises a number of questions, one being 400 million. What is that as a percentage of the profit that was going to be made anyway? What's the 400 million going to be used for if they have had the fine paid? And what lessons were learned by the company who made the pollution incident? Will it spur on better behaviours and better compliance? So yeah, it's good to see that when the polluter pays is actually working, but then what?
And it should be a water story.
Yes, it should be. Now that's thinking about it now, it's actually more about how it's impacted on what is a very large population. When you look at the percentage of the population that have been affected by it and the conditions they have in terms of water availability. So given that water is a scarce resource in that country, to have an incident like this is much more alarming than perhaps in a country where there's more supply. Not that it should happen there either, but where it is so acute, then the impact is much, much greater. So yes, I would concur it is actually a water story.
Gillian Fulford?
I think that I mean, obviously it's a tragic story, but I think it highlights that there's, if we were to take this same principle of the polluter pays and apply that to combined sewage overflows in Scotland or the UK, for example, which cause all kinds of pollution onto beaches and rivers, we would have a driver to, in the boardroom, as you're saying, to change different practices and start to mitigate those combined sewage overflow events. So I think it's perhaps, it's a big story and a big problem and a huge amount of money, but we can learn things about that in terms of how we might address our water more sustainably on issues at home potentially. Certainly, if we applied polluted paste to combined sewage overflow, then I would have new business opportunities, creating economic growth in areas how to control that. So I think that what it kind of says to me is that it's, the fine creates a purchase imperative for new solutions. Can we transfer that to other areas where we want to see action?
That's a good point.
Thank you. Galen, I'm actually going to stick with you to start us off on the next story, which our viewers can see at the bottom of their screens, linked to a headline, Philippines made progress rebuilding after Typhoon Haiyan, but risks remain. A year after Typhoon Haiyan. Galen, I'm starting with you because I know that your business, Biomatrix, has some ongoing work in the Philippines. Perhaps you could take a couple of minutes to describe what it is that your company does in the Philippines and offer a reaction to this story, which was published by OOSKAnews on 7th November.
Yeah, I think, the Philippines is the natural capital disaster of the world. That's how they refer to themselves over there. In the course of doing projects over there, I was through quite a number of typhoons before Haiyan, obviously not as severe. But I think it's a good lesson to all of us in terms of how we design resilient infrastructures. How do we design a floating island to clean up a river which is designed to resist typhoons, for example? That's partly what we've been involved in over there is really looking at how to deal with the wastewater pollution issues. I think that on an international scale we've made great progress in terms of drinking water availability, but the sanitation front is still lagging far behind. So cities like Manila, for example, 16 to 20 million people, depending on if you count them all or not, has something like 2% of its population connected to proper wastewater treatment services, and those wastewater treatment services which are connected treat to a BOD of 50 or sometimes, and then discharge to Manila Bay, which is pretty substandard treatment and discharging to a vital estuary. So really what we've been working on there is trying to solve these large-scale wastewater problems, and to be honest, we haven't been able to do it. We're a small company, it's a huge city, but right the way across South China, through Southeast Asia, all of the major cities on India and the coast have this same problem with massive amounts of wastewater discharging essentially to combined sewage drains, open canals, and into rivers, estuaries, and the ocean. And on one hand, we can say the water industry is incredibly competitive, and we're all vying for the same water treatment jobs and so forth, and it is extremely competitive. However, there's still huge, massive problems which are not being adequately solved. So our particular approach to try and come up with that has been twofold. One has been to provide water treatment directly within the polluted water courses themselves to increase their natural capacity to, or increase nature's capacity to treat water, several hundredfold by introducing some good engineering techniques, and also to try and design a cheaper, easier to build wastewater treatment plant, because the cost of wastewater treatment and the ease of even building your basic SBR or activated sludge treatment plant can be prohibitive in these locations and be far too slow. Just the whole process is just too slow and too expensive, when you've got other priorities and people who are hungry and other things. So we've set it as one of our objectives as our company is to really drive down the cost. So we should be better, but we should be cheaper, and we're making really great steps in that direction. And so have a look at our website. You can take a look at our Helix Flow reactor, since you asked.
Yeah.
Well, describe your technology, please, Galen.
Well, we've got the one I was just describing. Helix Flow reactor 1 is designed to be a full-scale wastewater treatment system which operates on cascade processes, so reactor cell after reactor cell, but instead of pouring concrete and building big structures, we integrate it into the landscape using liner technology and a series of modular floating ecosystems with aeration and circulation and so forth. So we still do have operational energy and so forth, but the capital costs and total costs come way down because we are increasing the footprint a little bit and using less materials in the overall process. And by increasing the footprint a little bit, we allow the reaction rate constant, the biological reaction rate constant of the overall system to be a little bit slower, not quite as fast, which means that we have less energy inputs, which means that our TOTEX changes, which is the name of the game in water treatment. I'm not sure if that was the answer you were looking for.
Well, the way that I would describe it, if somebody asked me, what does Gale and Fulford do, I would say that you've got these great little floating islands with plants growing out of them, and you put them in dirty rivers and canals, and they clean up magically.
Yeah, that's magically, but is where the IP comes in.
Jim Panton, your reaction to this story?
Yeah, I think this is what makes our this industry, certainly from my point of view, really exciting. I mentioned it earlier on, and it's in my bio, but my background was in the charity sector, and I did that because I'm probably motivated by some form of deep social conscience that I probably couldn't describe fully if I really had to. And when my father retired and invited me to take over the family business in the water industry, where I hadn't really had an involvement before, I do remember, even as a child, when he was working in the water sector, thinking, the water sector, that's not very exciting. I'd much rather do other things that are perhaps potentially more exciting. But when I got the opportunity to get involved in this, the two worlds for me kind of effectively came together. One is there's the business challenge and the excitement that brings in terms of being able to realize value from a business sense. The other is the ability to do what Galen is doing, and that I'd like us to be able to do in the future. Not quite yet, because we have a very focused niche solution at the moment. But in due course, perhaps a vision further down the line would be to do the kinds of things that Galen is doing a little bit more. Get really clever about solving an emerging and massive global problem. Sorry, not emerging. It's already there in a big sense, but increasingly becoming much more of a problem where actually the social return from what you're doing is as big, if not bigger, than the business challenge or the business return. And this is a desperate story. It talks about international aid and charities that are involved in it. And it's a really interesting overlap between where social returns through a more kind of perhaps, I hesitate to use the word again, but I can't think of a better one, the charitable element within this is overlapping with business opportunity. And to put those two together makes this sector fascinating. And I think if we can see how over time we can get clever and clever with technology to do more to improve the lot for those who are really struggling when it comes to water supplies for whatever purpose that is, that's fascinating and a really enjoyable challenge to be part of.
Will Sarney, when you introduced yourself at the start of our gathering, you mentioned WASH, meaning water, sanitation and health, as I believe a business challenge or directly or indirectly a corporate risk. Is this a humanitarian story or is it a water story? Is this a humanitarian story or is it a water story?
Sure. Well, I don't think it's either or. I think it's all of the above. It's certainly a social issue. It's a public sector issue, but it's also a business issue. I think it's increasingly difficult to operate in an emerging market where your employees, the community in which you operate in, potentially your consumers, don't have access to safe water, sanitation, and hygiene. So, to me, that's well beyond CSR. That is just the reality of, operating in a market where people don't have the most basic human needs met. So I wouldn't pick one over the other. I think what it points out is that it's really all of them.
Nasli, I was turning to you as I received a question from Liz in Virginia. I think it does relate to this story. A lot of the discussion so far has focused on risk and opportunity for the corporate and industrial sectors. This is clearly a social and humanitarian story, but you've looked at competing water users. Does this have, and in the context of agriculture, does this have an agricultural angle, this story?
Of course, in one part of the story, it said that it has impacted the infrastructure and the livelihood of Filipinese people impacted by the disaster. So I would say the agricultural activities must have been also affected. Are we talking about?
You keep going.
So I would say yes.
It's affecting surface and subsurface water conditions, which clearly affect agriculture.
Yeah. I would say so. Yes. In this context, I think disasters impact the water quality and availability of water to be used either in agriculture or domestic use or any other industrial water supply. So I assume it has impacted a diversity of economic activities involving, also including agriculture in Philippines, even though there is no direct statement of saying this. I guess we can infer this from the text.
Nick Simpson?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I mean, for me, what concerns me is that it's a year ago, and since then, there's still millions of people that don't have sufficient, good quality, acceptable drinking water, and there's also risks of contamination, and that's a year. So there's the immediate issues in terms of putting some temporary equipment in, making things safe for people so that more people don't die over the next 12 months. But then there's the infrastructure. There's an opportunity to do things differently. It was imperfect before, so there's an opportunity to redesign, redistribute and do things differently to make sure that it's more secure for the future. But these things obviously take time, and they're still, after looking at this for a year, they're still getting their heads around it. And then for me, there's an analogy here with Thames Water, because I was talking to somebody within the industry a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying that when we had exceptional rainfall last year, Thames Water within about 2.5 hours of losing about 25% of the potable drinking water quality for the London area. And that's why there's been emphasis on the super sewer, improving the infrastructure, trying to take the waste away, segregating it from potable water supplies and distribution. So again, I think there's lessons to be learned on a global basis here around putting precautions in place, being proactive, looking to the future, what is likely to change, and how do we mitigate these risks. And unfortunately, these lessons seem to be learnt at the sacrifice of people's well-being.
Thank you. I'm conscious that not everybody had an opportunity to contribute thoughts on that story, but I'd like to move on in the interests of time from natural disasters to man-made disasters. The link on your screen is Ecuadorian villagers press US State Department to make Chevron pay for Amazon pollution. Joppie Kramwinkel, I'm calling on you again because you're from that oil and gas background. Can you offer us your views on this story, please?
What Will Sardi says. I mean, this is so complex. I mean, I've been in Ecuador. I know the situation. This is legal, very complicated. So I'm going to pass judgment on this. The only thing what I do say is that when you start to explore in areas of great environmental sensitivity or social sensitivity, things are not easy. So I mean, the issue clearly is related to the local community. The issue is clearly related to the impact they've had. But to ask me, who doesn't know anything of the case, to make any judgment on the story, is this story goes back, I think, I can't remember in the text, but it is 10, 15 years. So I mean, this is not a recent story. This is a long-standing story between the community, the state of Ecuador, and the US and the company in the middle. So I see this is not unique, this type of conflicts. So I think it's all part and parcel of the oil and gas sector moving into these more conflict areas, whether it is Alaska, whether it is the North Pole in Russia, or whether it is the sensitive areas in the. So that is a consequence of the situation, and things like this happen apparently, and they are being resolved somehow. So let me not give me. I just want to come back only one thing about the previous discussion. I think about climate change. The story was very good, but it misses out on the need to be resilient. So if you rebuild your infrastructure, be realistic that the next thing can happen again. So you shouldn't build your infrastructure in the way you did it in the past. So sorry that I wanted to say that, but on this one, please, I mean, this is too complex. It's great that you make the people aware that this is the case, but this is too complex for me to answer.
Thank you, Joppie. I note that, thinking back to our first story about the CDP report, that Chevron was not one of the reporting companies, not one of the 42% of the Fortune 500 who did report. I'm not sure what that means, but I'm interested to hear Alan Hendry's thoughts on this story.
I suppose I'd agree with Joppie. It's obviously it's a story that's come out, and it's complex, and I really don't know enough about the details to comment. But I suppose the reflection is that the fact is that it has been taken to court. Something's been done about it. The problems have been recognised, and hopefully there's some redress that will resolve the situation. But I guess we live in a world now where everything is reported. I think it's very hard for things to happen and people essentially to not have it out in the public eye. So I think it's a consequence of the world we live in, where information is easily accessible and easily reportable. But beyond that, I'm sort of loath to say much more. But again, I also just like to reflect with Joppie on the previous Philippines story, and said that water was very much a Cinderella subject. I think the whole topic of resilience and climate change adaptation remains quite a Cinderella topic, because we know that the weather is changing, we know the impacts that are going to happen, and it's essentially about designing around that. Some impacts will just be too great even for good design, but it's start to realise that. And I guess in the case of the Philippines, it's also an economic story, because while they might know that they can build to more resilient standards, they necessarily have the finance to do that.
Nazli, your thoughts on this Chevron in Ecuador?
As it has been stated, I guess we need more details on this to comment further. But apart from everything, maybe it is very sad that the people who suffered the direct externalities of the disaster is not compensated, because there is a lot of legal framework, and every stakeholder might have a valid argument. However, the indigenous group, who is most probably suffering the circumstances,
well, they're suffering a lot more than Chevron or the U.S. State Department for that matter.
Yeah. So they have to face the consequences, and it's a sad part of the story.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next one. On your screen, the headline is clickable, and it says Japan finds flood control problems at 201 dams. I'd quite like if we could have Jim Panton to contribute first on this one. This is an area of your company's expertise.
Yeah, not directly. We it would be good to be able to be an expert in this in due course, because it's not far off what we do. And I think what you're referring to is the sediment removal or dredging systems that we have in place. We use underwater robotic technology for the removal of sediment within live water storage structures. Predominantly at the moment, most of our experience is in the drinking water sector, in the treated end, where you have large treated drinking water storage facilities that perhaps can't be taken offline because they're in critical supply, and there would be a knock-on impact to supply if they were taken out of offline, and our technology can go in while they're live and do effectively an underwater vacuuming job to remove the sediment from those tanks. So this is open raw water effectively. It's not far off, but it still has a link, and I think that the key message that jumped out at me on this one, which is something we see in the areas I referred to already, where we do operate, and that's the long-term planning. I think Galen was talking about this early on. The long-term planning for infrastructure costs in terms of maintenance and preparing for the unexpected as much as preparing for the expected. People often say to us, well, how often do you go back into a treated water storage tank to remove the sediment? And there's no fixed answer, because every single system is different, and every one of these dams would be different. But there's a similarity in all of these, that implying on the ratio of dams that are affected that they didn't get something right in terms of their planning for maintenance and the costing out of being able to do that. And the ramifications of that could be far worse than what we're reading about here. This is a warning story. The one above about the Philippines was an after the event disaster story. You only have to think back to New Orleans and dredging and river and some of the water sources there that were blamed for the incidents back in the mass flooding and disaster they had, where this sounds like it could potentially be the same thing if there was some form of climate catastrophe. So it's a tough one, and it's very easy to sit here on a panel when you run a small business like I do and point the finger, but going back a number of years, lessons learned about being able to plan better and plan the maintenance and infrastructure upkeep is a critical part that I think is well recognized, but this is just an example of where it went wrong.
Nick Simpson.
Again, I think the story kind of falls short, because it tells you how much the dams cost to build, but it doesn't really give you an idea of the cost in terms of removing the sediment. So for me, there's a whole economic argument here as to, okay, it's holding sufficient water, but what is the potential detriment of not doing it? What is the cost of doing it? So therefore, what is the benefit? And for me, it's one of these things that if they don't want to spend the money because it is significant, you can guarantee that when one of those dams fails, they'll rush out and spend the money. So again, it's those priorities in terms of where they lie within the local economy, I guess. And that's the only point that I would make on that.
I think the struggle between capital and revenue funding generally in a lot of projects, people like something big, new and shiny, and there's always money for that, but then is there money to maintain it? That always seems to be more of a struggle, and I think that's an example of that. And it's not just in this industry, it happens all over the place.
Thank you. Will Sarney, anything on this one, please?
Yeah, just coming off of mute. Yeah, I think, obviously we're looking at, weather events from climate change, but, we need to be mindful that, water scarcity and water quality issues are driven by other factors. You overlay climate change and things like flooding and droughts on top of it just complicate what businesses in the public sector are dealing with.
Thank you. Let's move on to our next story, which was chosen in the spirit of business isn't always big business. And this is a story, the headline on your screen, which you can click, is Kenya WWF launched payment for environmental services program on the Mara River, and this has implications for local tea growers. Nasri, you talked about payment for ecosystem services earlier. Can you share your thoughts on this story, please?
Again, I think this is inspiring that even in developing countries, the ecosystem payments and ecosystem services, and therefore payments for ecosystem services, are recognized. I hope it would be a successful project and helps avoiding disasters like those we have read about in the previous story news.
Galen, can you share your thoughts on this one, please?
I think that, the whole payment for ecosystem services field is very interesting, and I think it opens up kind of an opportunity in this field for kind of the likes of myself, where we think about what if we take ecosystem services almost and put on the lens of kind of private sector forces. For example, if there's an incentive to protect or create ecosystem services, then can the private sector do different things which provide those on like a build, not a boot contract, but like an environmental impact bond type of basis. So you'll only get paid for results. So what if we're in situations like a river restoration situation or this kind of thing where there's ecosystem services, particularly in the restorative field where we need to protect and restore waterways, if people can restore it, is there an opportunity to drive that by providing credits and financial incentives for specific things like biodiversity and so forth?
Galen, I have a question here. So what you are suggesting in brief is to put a shadow price for ecosystem services?
I think, well, not really, kind of. It's more like a payment for them. It's more like it's more like an environmental impact bond for protection or restoration, particularly of water services.
Joppie Kramwinkel, how does one pay for ecosystem servicing?
Well, I really like it. I mean, it's a methodology where you actually get financial flows going from one party who actually benefits from the services to those who actually are active in maintaining the services or actually restoring the services. So I think it's a great tool. What is missing is probably the structures which allows this to grow, to become more mainstream. We are actually, within our own business council, are looking at how to get more business communities, financial flows going into natural infrastructure, which is what this is all about. I mean, you want to quantify the benefits, to make it clear to those who get the benefit that's what they get. The problem is that there are more parties than just one who gets the benefit. So in other words, how do you collaborate? How do you do that together? So huge challenges. If the connection is very clear, or a short line in this particular case, between the farmers and the infrastructure itself, then it's clear. If the distance is a little bit bigger, it becomes more difficult. But there are great examples in several parts of the world where this works. We would like, our organization would like to see a lot more of this happening, because it really is. So you give me the floor, Neil. I just wanted to say one thing about what you mentioned about Chevron, because that really struck me. Is that if you don't report the CDP, what about them? Not everybody discloses to the CDP, but most companies, including Chevron, write annual reports in which they disclose everything what they do. So by just saying that they don't participate in the CDP project, it doesn't necessarily seem that they're not actually transparent in what they do. So just a sideline, I want to come back to you. I didn't know whether you'd give me the floor for that, but that was the contribution to that discussion. But really, payment for environmental services is really where we have to go to.
But a company's annual report doesn't disclose water use and abuse in detail.
Well, that depends.
Chevron's annual report. Let's move on to our final story that was distributed to the panel in advance. On your screen, the headline, which is clickable, is "Water Shortages Continue in Mexico After Sonora River Spill." Perhaps I could ask Nick Simpson to go first on this one.
Again, this is very similar to the first story we talked about. Again, I'm still a believer in polluter pays. If it needs more money because they can't provide sufficient drinking water to the populace, they need to put their hand in their pocket and sort it out. And I think companies that do pollute the environment need to be held to account. And I think there's lots of examples, BP being probably the most well-known globally, where people do that. So from my perspective in this story, I think it's around making sure that the polluter puts the infrastructure in place that they have had a detrimental impact upon, so that everybody can go around living their daily lives as they were previously.
Alan Hendry.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's similar to the other stories. I mean, I think the thing that strikes me is just the sheer number of people that are affected by these incidents. It's really quite alarming. 23,000 people affected by a spill is scary stuff, and I think we just need to recognise the impacts that can be made when things aren't done properly.
Nasli, can you contribute on this one, please?
Again, like Ellen has pointed out, the number of people which are affected this kind of incidents, or maybe it might be disasters like in the Philippines case, is so huge that it also points out how significant how much importance we should put in precautions and the need for investment and concern in this case, because many people and their livelihoods are affected.
Sorry, I was just going to say as well, one thing you notice about the article is that it's not the only time it's happened. So they've done it once, they've put procedures, processes in place, and it's happened again. A different issue, but it's the same company. So at some point, you have to make a decision as to their licence to operate. But the problem is they've got to clean up the mess before you put them out of business. So you either maintain production on the basis that they have a revenue stream to help clean up the environment, or you say, I'm sorry, but you're not a responsible business, we don't want you here. Somebody at some point needs to take those sorts of decisions.
So is that the role of the state?
Or the environmental legislator, whoever that may be, so the state.
Will Sarney, would you like to contribute to this one?
I'm going to follow Yopa and just have to pass on this one also. Again, it's a compliance issue, so I just don't know any of the details.
Jim Panson, would you agree this is a water story?
Yeah, but can I take a slightly different angle on it? And before I came along today, I didn't expect that I would be finding a similar theme popping up in my head on just about everything that I've felt compelled to comment on. And again, we're back to the financial side of things, and the bit of the story that jumps out at me. Again, like others, I don't know the detail behind this particular incident apart from what we've read in the story, but the paragraph that jumped out at me was the bit about the tanker drivers who hadn't been paid and were stopping delivery. When the truck union leader is commenting on that, and it comes back to the kind of financing of just about everything we're talking about. And when we, as a small business, are perhaps looking to pitch to an investor for support on a new technology that we want to perhaps try and take into a new market within the water industry generally, one of the things we have to present is the opportunity, the business opportunity. So as an investor, they feel that there's something worth their while in supporting. And we can put slides up until the cows come home, which you can pull from just about any water industry website about the size of the market that is the water industry and the exponential growth that you're going to be supposedly seeing within the sector from a financial point of view over a kind of 10 to 20 year period. And it just keeps making, the more we've looked at this, the more we've talked about these different stories, the more I've been thinking, well, okay, so there's going to be a huge investment required over the years to come because there's going to be more and more to do. But where's all this funding going to come from, and at what extent is the governments who are looking at their overall utility provision prepared to up the level of priority in terms of their budgets into the water sustainability generally, and where's that money going to come from if they do that? And then you end up looking at things like Irish Water, where there are protests in the streets in the last 2 weeks because they're talking about putting the cost to the consumer up. So I think there's climate worries and there's environmental worries, but actually financial worries in terms of how this is all going to be delivered is continually popping up. And here's just a tiny little sign where there's an incident that it needs dealing with, quite apart from the fine or the wrongdoing in the first place, but just in the cleaning up. And it might not necessarily be cleaning up, it might be something that's before all that happened, but just being able to pay the people involved is a financial constraint, and it's quite concerning, really. I'd almost go back to my first question: what keeps me awake at night? Well, after today, is probably how we're going to pay to keep this all going as the requirement grows and grows in the next 10 to 15 years.
Thank you. We have about 10 minutes left. I'd like to pose a slightly different question to each of our panelists. One of the things we're trying to do with the aquaNOW audiences is to raise public awareness about water challenges beyond the little water families, the water technology family, the water governance family, the water financing family, the humanitarian family, the environmental family, who do think about water profoundly and rightly within their silos, maybe not sufficiently beyond their silos, but the public hasn't really got the hang of it yet, would be my position, where climate change was not on the front pages 20 years ago, but is now. Maybe water should be getting towards the front pages, but I don't feel that it's close in the mainstream media and in public consciousness, and which impacts political will. Should water be doing better to be getting onto front pages beyond disaster scenarios? Alan Hendry.
Well, probably yes. I guess the parallel I would choose to use is how we used to deal with waste in the country. And I used to work in a local authority, and frankly they weren't very good at recycling. And then there was a European directive which basically said you had to recycle, so the legislation and the regulation started to kick in. That was supported by funding programmes from the Scottish Government, and suddenly it went from being a local authority that couldn't recycle to save itself to one of the best in the country. So I think there are examples, and the no smoking ban's another one if we stay slightly parochial in Scotland, where you actually can get mass change around a subject. And I think it's aligning all those levers to deliver that change rather than just relying on one, whether it's regulation or funding. I think you need them all to work in tandem to deliver that change. But I think it can be done, and certainly what you see now on climate change is so much more than we used to see, say, 10 years ago, and what we used to talk about is sustainability, we're now repeating in water, and we've seen step change there. But it's slower than we need, and it's slower I'd want to see, but at least it's headed in the right direction. It's just the scale and the pace we need to up, and I think that's not beyond us, and there are the new technologies coming in, so it's how we actually all align those that will create a real step change.
Nazli Koscioglu.
I would say that, as it has been brought up by the panelists a couple of times, recognizing the true value of water and ecosystem services and goods have been something that we have neglected for for a very long time, and now it's a pressing need. So when we think about the cost of water, it's not the only the cost of operation that is charged by the utilities. It is also social and environmental externalities and the opportunity cost of water. I think also after discussing the news stories, I would say disasters and incidents should always be thought of and taken into consideration when making future investments or business ventures, and the responsibilities has to be thought about both by governments and companies within the framework, legal framework.
Thank you. Joppie Kramwinkel, should water be higher on the political agenda? Joppie Kramwinkel, should water be higher on the political agenda?
I think it depends very much where you are. I mean, if you're in India, it is very high on the political agenda. I think in California, it's very high on the political agenda. So if the issues are really pressing, I think globally there is already a lot of awareness. As I said earlier, I think it has reached the board level of the major corporations. So I mean, I think there is awareness. In my own country, the Netherlands, something really interesting happened, that for the first time in history, we actually allocated close to $9 billion in reinforcing our defense against the seas, without actually having had a flood to pressure us that. So I think there is globally an increasing awareness. Your question was whether the public really feels this in general, and to what extent will the public influence the decision making. I don't necessarily know the answer to that. In essence, I think the public wants the services, the public wants is concerned. But in the end of the day, it is governments, politicians who have to translate that into action. And I'm not so pessimistic about that translation into action. If I step back, I see for the first time a complete new water goal in the whole debate about sustainable development in the UN systems. So I think we're getting there. So I mean, continue the hard work, and we're on the right track.
Thank you. Nick Simpson.
If you look at the consumer goods market, the likes of companies such as Unilever, Nestle, for example, that the brand is very customer focused, customer facing. A lot of their development and the way they look at sustainability is driven by the consumer. Same with supermarkets and right the way through the supply chain. I was at the energy conference a couple of months ago, and Dr. Winston was talking about habitual change. The way we use water, the way we consume energy, etc., it's a habit that you form over a period of time. And he talked that they'd done some scientific research around recycling, and they believe it takes about 3 generations to actually make a difference. And you start with children in school, you educate them about the use, the benefits, the social impact, etc. But it's only when they become adults themselves and have children and the messages continue that over those 3 generations people start to change their habits. And I think with water, because the price relative to energy is very low, unless there is an increase in that price to drive behaviour, it will come from societal desire for a different way of doing things. And that pressure will come from the children of today, which will be the adults of tomorrow. So I think there'll be a driver there within society to make people look at water differently, irrespective of the price.
Thank you. Will Sarney.
Sure, happy to weigh in. I think when water is abundant, either real or perceived, little attention is paid to where it comes from and how to value it. And I think that's the big shift that we're seeing, at least in certain parts of the world. So I think there's enormous potential in both the public and private sector to focus on education and awareness around the value of water again, moving well beyond the price, and how to manage this shared resource that we all need, love, relate to. So I see a lot of hopeful signs. I think NGOs are doing a terrific job. I think multinationals are increasingly focused on the broader issues of water risk and stewardship. And the public sector also, again, in the part of the world where I live, you're seeing a lot of attention being paid to educating consumers, customers about the realities of water availability and how to manage this resource in a different way, and basically shift to a 21st century paradigm around water where we value it, and as a result we put different systems in place, including changing pricing and things like that.
Jim Panson.
Yeah, very quickly. I think the answer is definitely more awareness is required, and I speak from a personal point of view as probably the newest arrival within the sector or the industry on the panel. Not that long ago, I wasn't particularly aware of much of this, and I know I can look back and see how much awareness is raised in my own mind just in the last few years by being exposed to it. But I'll come back to the Irish water issue that I was reading about earlier on, and a particular quote, and it really reflects a lot of what's being said. It really just backs it up about the awareness of cost of delivery. The BBC put out an article about the troubles that they're experiencing, and as Yoppie was saying, the political pressures depend largely on where you are, and in Ireland it's become a pretty big issue for them in terms of a priority politically. But in society, there's still a big gap, and a couple of people who were interviewed over there had some interesting comments, one of whom said, many wonder why people living on a relatively wet island surrounded by water should have to pay for something that until now has been free. So that's a perception that I think we need to educate, as was mentioned by Will. And another individual there said, we've got so much water, we should supply Europe. Are they going to charge us for the air next? And it just highlights just the lack of awareness until it's an issue. If you're in Africa or you're in Brazil right now, or many of these other places, the Philippines, it'll be a high priority and there'll be general awareness. But if it isn't an issue, and it hasn't been until recently in Ireland, the awareness takes a bit of time to catch up, and that's about training and priority.
Thank you. And Galen Fulford.
Yeah, I think it really depends on locations. Obviously, you're somewhere dry, then it's more of a political issue. I think what's interesting is that here in Scotland, it's exceedingly wet. Certainly has been last week, but it's also a very big priority. And there's a whole hydronation program and all of that. And we don't have high water prices or big water disasters. So I think it's a bit of a unique case where, as Scotland has recognized the importance of water. I think that beyond the kind of political importances, I think that there's a real need for individual businesses, ourselves sitting here, and to take more awareness of water at the individual home and individual business level. For example, I live up in Moray, a couple hours from here. It's all wet and soggy and everything and lovely, but I live on a sandy peninsula out into the Moray Firth, and actually there's no fresh water. It's so sandy, there's no real pond, so I'm actually in a water vulnerable location, and I happen to have, a couple 100 liters of water, reserve on hand, but water resilience and becoming more water resilient, hands-on, not just conceptually or politically, is really important. I've got one gutter on my house which has lead flashing on it, so I can't take that one, so I take rainwater from the other one and replenish my reserve water supply. Small things, but the Australians and folks from New Zealand can certainly teach us a few tricks in terms of individual water resilience.
Thank you very much. Galen, we are at the end of our second aquaNOW audience. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our panelists for their participation, particularly Will and Yoppie coming in remotely to join us this afternoon in Scotland, and the Business Council for Sustainable Development of the United Kingdom for helping us to produce this event. The next aquaNOW audience will be on the 17th of January. Watch out for your OOSKAnews newsletters. You will get full details about that in due course. Thanks also to the Edinburgh Centre for Carbon Innovation for hosting us here today, and to the aquaNOW audience supporters, the Highlands and Islands Enterprise, Scottish Enterprise, the Scottish Government, and aquanow.info. That's all from Edinburgh today. Join us for the next aquaNOW audience in January. Thank you very much.